The alien market was alive with noise and color. Strange voices shouted in many languages. Bright banners hung from stalls. And the air was thick with the smell of cooked meat, metal, and alien spices. Merchants waved their arms, showing strange tools, glowing crystals, and cages of small animals. The twin suns hung high in the sky, making the dusty streets almost too bright to look at. But in the middle of all this movement, there was one still figure, a small alien girl, thin and trembling. Stood near a wooden platform, her skin was pale with a faint shimmer. Her hair tangled and falling over her face. Her clothes were torn and stained, barely holding together. Her bare feet were dusty and scratched from the rough market ground. She didn't speak, she didn't move, her large, bright eyes only watched the ground. She looked as if she wanted to disappear. The auctioneer stood above her, his voice loud and cruel. "This one," he shouted, pointing at the girl, "is not worth much damaged goods." Some aliens laughed, others muttered. A few threw small scraps of food toward her, but not in kindness. It was mockery. No one stepped closer. No one wanted her. It was clear she had been here before. Standing like this, it was clear she had been unwanted for a long time. From the crowd, a man was walking slowly. He didn't look like the others. His skin was human, light brown from sun, his dark jacket dusty from travel. His name was Daniel, and he had only stopped in this market to buy engine parts for his small ship. But his eyes stopped on the girl. For a moment, he forgot about the noise, the smell, the crowd. Something about the way she stood, small, quiet, alone, made his chest feel heavy. The auctioneer noticed his gaze and grinned, human. He called, "You want her?" "She's no trouble, just trash. You can have her." The crowd laughed again. A voice shouted, "Take her if you want to smell like the garbage pits." Another voice added, "She'll bring you bad luck." But Daniel didn't laugh. He stepped forward through the crowd. Every eye followed him. He stopped in front of the platform and looked at the girl. She didn't raise her head. She only tightened her arms around herself as if the air was too cold. "What's your name?" Daniel asked softly. The auctioneer rolled his eyes. "She won't answer you. Hasn't spoken all morning?" Daniel ignored him. He pulled his jacket from his shoulders and placed it gently around the girl. She froze in surprise. The human's coat was warm, smelling faintly of metal and fuel. No one had given her warmth in a long time. The auctioneer snorted, "Fine, human, take her. But don't come crying when the city guards fine you for harboring worthless stock." Daniel didn't answer. He placed one hand on the girl's shoulder and said quietly, "You're coming with me for the first time." She looked up. Her eyes were bright, almost glowing in the sunlight, but they were filled with disbelief. "Why?" she whispered, her voice small and unsure. Daniel gave the smallest smile. "Because no one else will." The crowd watched in silence as Daniel led her away. Some shook their heads. Others whispered about the foolish human. A few spat on the ground, but no one stopped them. As they reached the edge of the market, the noise faded behind them. The girl walked slowly, as if she couldn't believe she was free to move. She held the jacket tightly around her small frame. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above the sound of the street. "My name is Lyra." Daniel nodded. "Nice to meet you, Lyra." She didn't reply. Her eyes kept looking at the ground. It was clear she didn't trust this kindness. She had been alone for too long, and somewhere, deep inside, she believed he would give her up just like everyone else. But Daniel kept walking. He didn't look. Back at the market, he didn't see the shadow that moved between the stalls. Watching them go, someone in that crowd had noticed Lyra. And they were already following. The twin suns burned in the sky as the human and the alien girl disappeared into the streets. Neither of them knew that this small act of kindness had just begun something much bigger. Daniel walked through the narrow streets with Lyra beside him. The market's noise was far behind now, replaced by the low hum of the city. Tall buildings of strange alien design leaned over the road, their walls glowing with faint lights. Hover carts drifted past, and the smell of oil mixed with the distant scent of fresh bread from a street vendor. Lyra kept her head down. Every step she took was small, as if she expected someone to grab her at any moment. Her thin fingers clutched the edges of Daniel's jacket tightly. She didn't speak, but her eyes flicked toward every sound: a clattering crate, a loud voice, the hiss of a steam vent. Daniel slowed his steps so she could keep up. "You hungry?" he asked, glancing at her. She gave a small nod, but her lips pressed together as if she regretted admitting it. "Good," he said. "We'll get food first." They reached a small food stall tucked into the corner of a busy side street. The owner, a round alien with 4 eyes and a friendly face, greeted Daniel with a wave. "What'll it be? Human?" the vendor asked. Daniel ordered 2 bowls of stew and a loaf of bread. When the food came, Lyra stared at it like she couldn't believe it was for her. Her hands shook as she picked up the bread, breaking off small pieces and chewing slowly. Daniel noticed she didn't eat fast. It wasn't because she wasn't hungry. It was because she had learned to make food last after they finished. Daniel paid and thanked the vendor as they walked away. A group of rough-looking aliens leaned against a wall, watching them. One of them smirked. Didn't think humans liked trash. Daniel kept walking, ignoring them, but Lyra's shoulders tightened. She had heard words like that before. Many times, they reached the edge of the city, where the noise was softer and the air felt cleaner. Daniel's small home was built from metal panels and old ship parts. Resting beside the spaceport's outer fence, it wasn't much, but it was his, inside. The lights flickered on, revealing a neat space with a small table, a sleeping cot, and shelves filled with tools. Lyra stood at the doorway, not stepping. "You can come inside," Daniel said, smiling. She nodded, but her eyes scanned the room carefully before taking a single step. "Sit," Daniel said, pulling out a chair. She sat, folding her hands in her lap. "You got a place to stay?" he asked. She shook her head. "You got family here?" Another small shake of the head. He sighed. "All right, you can stay here." For now, her eyes widened slightly. "For now?" she repeated softly. "Yeah," he said, "until you figure out where you want to go." She lowered her gaze again, as if trying to hide the tiny spark of hope in her face, as Daniel prepared a blanket for her. He decided to ask, "How'd you end up at that market?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she said quietly, "I was taken from my clan." Daniel frowned. "Taken?" She nodded. "They said I wasn't worth keeping." Her voice cracked at the last word, and she turned her head away. Daniel didn't push her for more. Instead, he handed her the blanket and said, "You're safe here." She held the blanket to her chest like it was something precious. The warmth of the fabric made her eyes sting. She hadn't felt safe in a long time. That night, Daniel lay on his cot while Lyra slept curled up on the small couch. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the spaceport beyond the fence. But outside, in the dark streets, a shadow moved. 2 figures stood at a distance, watching the faint light from Daniel's window. One whispered in a sharp alien tongue, "The exile is with the human." The other nodded. "We will take her." Back before sunrise, inside, Daniel didn't know that danger was already coming. He only knew that he had made a choice to help a stranger no one wanted. And he had no idea that this first step would pull him into a fight far bigger than my far bigger than my not. My no skill like my nose case, and leaves a rich, long-lasting color. He only knew that my night's case lawly sieve, my night's k sieve, my night nigh not sieve, my night sect, my nigh k, my nigh, my night sec, I nigh cases, my night sick, like by my nigh ev, It plays it, by we might see it. We guy it, play gikret, by I guys, it's a cricket I sides, can I reese I dis to be click lead to bit guts we weep to the seat he imagined. Morning came slowly to the outer edge of the spaceport. The first light of the twin suns slipped through the cracks in Daniel's shutters. Outside, the hum of engines began to rise as traders and pilots prepared for another day. Daniel sat at his small table, fixing a broken piece of wiring for his ship. The smell of heating bread filled the air, a simple breakfast warming on the old stove. Lyra sat quietly on the couch, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. She hadn't said much since waking up. Her eyes kept moving to the door, as if she was deciding whether to run or stay. Daniel noticed and said, "You're safe here." She gave a small nod, but her fingers twisted in the fabric of the blanket. It was clear she didn't believe him completely when the bread was ready. Daniel placed a slice on a plate and set it in front of her. She hesitated before taking it, like she still thought there might be a trick. He smiled and said, "Eat." Slowly, she took a bite, her shoulders relaxing just a little. After breakfast, Daniel leaned back in his chair. "What's your plan?" "My plan?" She repeated softly. "Yeah. Where do you want to go?" "I can help you get there." She lowered her gaze. "I don't have anywhere to go." Her voice was steady, but there was something heavy in it, like a truth she had accepted long ago. Daniel thought for a moment. "Then you can stay here until you figure it out." She shook her head. "I can't." "You'll get in trouble." "Trouble from who?" he asked. She hesitated. "From the clan that threw me away." "They don't want me alive." Daniel frowned, leaning forward. "Why?" Lyra's hands tightened on the blanket. "Because I'm an exile. In my clan, that means you have no rights, no home, no protection. And anyone who helps you is punished too." Her voice dropped lower. "They call us unwanted gifts." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Unwanted gifts." She nodded. "It's a cruel saying. It means you're something nobody wanted but someone was forced to take." Daniel leaned back in his chair, letting her words sink in. He understood now why the crowd at the market had laughed. He understood why she had looked like she expected to be abandoned at any second. Before he could say more, there was a faint sound outside, like feet shifting on metal. Lyra's head snapped toward the window, her eyes wide. Daniel stood quietly and walked to the door, opening it just enough to look out. The street was empty, but he didn't miss the shadow moving quickly around the corner. He closed the door and locked it. "You're being watched," he said. Lyra's breath caught. "It's them." Daniel moved to his workbench and grabbed a small blaster. "Checking the charge. They're not taking you," he said firmly. The rest of the morning passed in tense silence. Daniel pretended to work on repairs, but his eyes kept going to the door. Lyra sat in the corner, barely moving. Finally, he said, "We can't stay here long. They'll come back." She looked up at him. "Where will we go?" "I've got a ship," he said. "We can get off-world before they close the docks." For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Daniel paused, "Because no one else will." Her lips trembled like she wanted to say something more, but instead, she just nodded. They began packing quickly. Daniel gathered tools, food, and a few spare clothes. Lyra moved slowly, like she was unsure if she should touch anything. Daniel noticed and handed her a small satchel. "This is yours now." Her eyes widened at the word yours. She took it carefully, as if it might disappear if she held it too tightly by midday. They were ready. Daniel opened the door and looked out into the bright street. The spaceport was only a few blocks away. But between here and there, anything could happen. He turned to Lyra. "Stay close to me." She nodded, her small frame almost hidden inside his jacket. They stepped outside, moving quickly. The city felt different now. Every face seemed to be watching. Every corner, a place for danger to hide as they passed. A narrow alley. A voice called out in a language Daniel didn't understand. Lyra stiffened. "Keep walking," she whispered. Daniel didn't argue. When they reached the outer fence of the spaceport, Daniel felt a small sense of relief, but it didn't last. From behind, the sound of boots striking metal echoed down the street. Daniel glanced back and saw 3 figures in dark cloaks moving toward them. He tightened his grip on Lyra's hand. Her voice shook as she said, "They won't stop." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Then neither will I." They pushed forward toward the gates. Unaware that this journey was only just beginning, the twin suns were setting, spilling gold and red light over the metal walls of the spaceport. Daniel and Lyra moved quickly through the narrow side streets, keeping to the shadows. The air was cooler now, but tension hung heavy between them. Every sound, the hiss of a vent, the slam of a door, the low hum of a passing hovercart, made Lyra flinch. She kept glancing behind them, her steps quick and nervous. Daniel's eyes scanned every corner. He didn't like how quiet it was here. The main road to the docks was crowded, but this path felt empty in a way that wasn't right. He adjusted the strap on his bag and whispered, "Almost there." Lyra nodded but didn't speak. As they turned a corner, the light from the suns faded, swallowed by the tall buildings. That was when Daniel saw movement ahead, 2 cloaked figures standing at the far end of the street. They weren't walking, just waiting. Lyra's breath caught. "It's them," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel's hand moved to the small blaster hidden under his jacket. "Stay behind me," he said. They turned to go back, but the way they had come was no longer clear. 3 more cloaked shapes stepped out of the shadows, blocking the path. The street was narrow, the walls high. There was no easy way out. The figures began moving closer, their steps slow and deliberate from under the hoods. Faint glimmers of alien eyes reflected the dim light. One of them spoke in a harsh, rasping voice. "Give her to us, human. Walk away, and you will live." Daniel didn't move. "She's not going with you," he said firmly. The figure laughed, the sound low and cold. "You think she belongs to you. She belongs to no one. She is nothing." Lyra's fingers clutched the back of Daniel's jacket. She didn't dare speak, but her heart pounded so hard she thought they might hear it. Daniel's stance didn't change. "I don't care what you think she is," he said. "She's under my protection." The cloaked figures exchanged looks, their laughter like the scrape of metal. Then, without warning, the first one lunged forward. Daniel fired his blaster, the shot hitting the wall inches from the attacker's shoulder. The sound cracked through the narrow street, sending echoes bouncing off the metal walls. The attackers hesitated for a moment, then spread out. Surrounding them, Daniel grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her toward a small service tunnel half hidden by debris. "Run," he said, his voice sharp. They dashed forward, ducking into the tunnel as blaster bolts lit the air behind them. The narrow space smelled of oil and rust. Pipes rattled above their heads as they ran. Lyra stumbled once, but Daniel caught her before she fell. The tunnel curved and opened into a dim maintenance yard. Broken cargo crates lay scattered across the ground. Daniel pulled Lyra behind one of them and crouched low. They could hear footsteps approaching from the tunnel. "Slow and steady. They're hunting us," Lyra whispered. Daniel glanced around, spotting a ladder leading to an upper platform. "This way," he said. They climbed quickly, reaching the top just as the first cloaked figure stepped into the yard. From above, Daniel could see more of them entering, their heads turning, scanning the shadows. He moved silently, leading Lyra across the platform toward a back exit, but halfway there, a voice echoed up from below. "You can't run forever. human. She's marked for death. Lyra froze, her body trembling. Daniel leaned close and whispered, "Don't listen to them." She swallowed hard and forced herself to keep moving. The exit led to a high walkway that connected to the outer fence of the spaceport beyond that fence. The docking bays were visible, and Daniel's ship was only a few hundred meters away. But between them and freedom, the walkway's path curved around an open gap. Beneath it, the cloaked figures spread out, watching. Daniel gritted his teeth. "We keep going." They stepped onto the walkway, the metal creaking under their weight. The sound was enough to alert the hunters. Blaster fire rang out, sparks. Flying from the railing beside them, Daniel pushed Lyra forward, keeping himself between her and the gunfire. The walkway swayed slightly, each step feeling longer than it should. They reached the far side, rushing down a set of stairs. The smell of fuel and the roar of engines grew louder. The docks were close as they slipped into the busy main dockyard. The noise and movement of workers and ships gave them cover. Daniel didn't slow down, guiding Lyra toward the far end where his small freighter waited. But just before they reached it, Lyra tugged on his sleeve. Her eyes were wide, looking past him. Daniel turned and froze. Standing in front of his ship was another cloaked figure, taller than the rest. The others kept their distance, as if this one was more dangerous. When the figure spoke, the voice was calm, almost polite. "You've gone far enough, human." "Hand her over." Daniel's grip on his blaster tightened. Lyra's voice shook as she whispered, "That's their leader." The leaders who'd tilted slightly. The faint outline of a cruel smile visible. "This is your last chance." The figure said. Daniel stepped forward, placing himself fully between Lyra and the threat. "Then I guess we're out of chances," he said. The dockyard lights burned bright against the darkening sky. Engines roared. Voices shouted orders, and the smell of hot fuel filled the air. Daniel stood still, his blaster aimed at the tall cloaked figure blocking the way to his ship. Lyra stayed close behind him, her hands clutching the fabric of his jacket like it was the only thing keeping her safe. Around them, workers pretended not to notice the standoff. Dockyards were full of dangerous business, and no one wanted to get caught in the middle. The leader of the cloaked hunters took a slow step forward. "You have no idea what you're protecting, human." The voice was calm but cold. Daniel didn't move. "All I need to know is that she's not going with you," he said. The leader tilted their head. "She is an exile of the Varen clan, marked for death by their law. You protect her. You share her sentence." Daniel's voice didn't waver. "Then I guess we both get the same sentence." The leader's hand twitched, and in an instant, blasters were raised from the shadows. Daniel grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her into motion. "Run," he said sharply. They darted between stacks of cargo containers, blaster fire lighting the air around them. Metal walls rang with the sound of impacts, sending sparks into the dark. Daniel led Lyra down a narrow service lane that wound deeper into the docks. Every few steps, he glanced back, catching glimpses of cloaked shapes following close behind. They passed a heavy loading door with a glowing control panel. Daniel slammed his palm against it, the door sliding down just as the first hunter rounded the corner. The impact of blaster bolts on the thick metal echoed like drumbeats. Daniel didn't wait. He kept moving, pulling Lyra through the maze of walkways and storage yards. Lyra's breaths came in quick bursts. Her legs were shaking. But she didn't slow down. Her voice trembled. "They won't stop. They'll keep hunting me until Daniel cut her off. Then we'll make sure they can't follow." They reached a maintenance lift. Daniel pushed Lyra inside and hit the controls. The platform shook as it began to rise, taking them toward an overhead catwalk. Below, the cloaked figures swarmed into the space they had just left. Scanning for any trace, Lyra leaned against the railing, her eyes wide as she watched them. They move like soldiers." She whispered. Daniel nodded. "They are soldiers, just working for the wrong side." The lift reached the catwalk, and they ran across it. From here, Daniel could see the glowing entrance to the main flight bay. His ship was there, a small freighter patched together with old parts, but reliable if they could get to it. They could leave this planet behind, halfway. Across, movement on the far end of the catwalk caught Daniel's eye. 3 hunters appeared, blocking the path. Daniel cursed under his breath. "Back," he said, turning Lyra toward the opposite side, but more shadows were already climbing the ladder. Behind them, cutting off escape. For a moment, there was no way forward. The hunters began to advance, their weapons raised. Lyra's hands tightened into fists, but she stayed silent. Daniel's eyes scanned the structure beneath them. A heavy cargo tram moved along a rail toward the bay. It was risky, but it was the only way. "Hold on to me," he said. Before Lyra could ask why, Daniel grabbed the catwalk railing and swung. Them both over the edge, they dropped onto the roof of the moving tram. The impact jarring through their bodies. Lyra gasped but didn't let go. Above, the hunters rushed to the railing, firing down at them. The shots sparked off the metal roof as the tram carried them forward. The tram rolled into the main bay, slowing as it approached a cluster of cargo lifters. Daniel jumped down, pulling. Lyra with him. Workers shouted in surprise, but Daniel didn't stop. They weaved through the chaos toward his ship. Every second counted. The hunters were coming. They reached the boarding ramp, Daniel slamming the control to raise it behind. Them inside, the ship smelled faintly of engine grease and worn metal. Daniel dropped his bag by the cockpit and began powering up the engines. Lyra stood near the door, watching the ramp rise with a mix of relief and fear. "They'll follow us," she said. Daniel didn't look back. "Not if we're fast enough." The hum of the engines grew into a roar through the cockpit window. Daniel saw the hunters spilling into the bay. The leader stood at the front, watching silently as the ship began to lift. Lyra moved closer, her voice low. "They'll come after us wherever we go." Daniel's hands tightened on the controls. "Then we make sure we stay ahead of them." The freighter rose higher, the ground dropping away. Blaster fire streaked past the hull, but Daniel angled sharply toward the open sky. The stars waited above. Lyra gripped the back of his seat, her eyes locked on the shrinking dockyard below. For the first time since they met, she whispered something almost like hope. "Maybe we can really get away." Daniel glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "We're not just getting away, Lyra," he said. "We're going somewhere they'll never find you." But deep down, he knew the road ahead was more dangerous than either of them could imagine. The freighter's engines roared as Daniel pulled the ship higher into the darkening sky. The city lights became a glittering patchwork below. Fading as they rose toward the upper atmosphere, Lyra stood beside him, holding the edge of the pilot's seat, her eyes wide. For the first time, there was space between them and the hunters. But Daniel knew it wouldn't last. The ship's radar blinked with a warning. 2 small blips appeared behind them. "Closing fast. Ships," Daniel muttered, his hands tightening on the controls. Lyra's voice was tense. "It's them." Daniel didn't argue. He could already see the faint glimmer of their engines through the viewport. He adjusted course, pushing the freighter toward open space. The old ship rattled, but the engines responded behind them. The 2 hunter crafts split apart, one climbing high, the other dropping low. "They're trying to box us in," Daniel said. Lyra swallowed hard. "Can we outrun them?" "Not for long," Daniel admitted. "We need another plan." A red light flashed on the control panel, missile lock. Daniel yanked the ship into a sharp dive, the stars spinning past the viewport. The missiles streaked overhead, exploding. Harmlessly in the empty dark, the shock wave rattled the hull, making the old freighter groan. "They're going to keep coming until they hit us." Lyra said quietly, Daniel glanced at her. Then we make sure they can't. He brought the ship low, skimming the upper edge of the spaceport's industrial zone. Below them, towers of fuel tanks and cargo cranes filled the night. One wrong move here could tear the ship apart. But it was the only way to use the environment against their pursuers. The first hunter ship dove after them, blasters firing bright. Streaks of energy zipped past, scorching the freighter's hull. Daniel banked hard to the left, sliding between two massive cargo lifts. The hunter followed, but clipped a crane arm, spinning out of control before smashing into a storage tower. The explosion lit the sky behind them. One down. Daniel breathed, but the second ship was still out there. It appeared from above, cutting across their path, forcing Daniel to veer sharply. The freighter shuddered, warning alarms blaring. Lyra gripped the seat tighter. "They're hurting us." Daniel's eyes narrowed. Not for long, he spotted an open docking bay ahead, its massive doors sliding shut for the night. With a burst of speed, he drove the freighter straight toward it. The hunter ship followed, closing the gap at the last moment. Daniel flipped the ship's stabilizers and dove under the bay doors. Skimming the floor of the massive hangar, the hunter tried to follow, but the heavy doors sealed shut before it could enter. The freighter hovered in the dim light of the empty bay. Daniel exhaled, his hands still gripping the controls. Lyra looked at him in disbelief. "You just trapped them outside." "For now," Daniel said, "but we can't stay here. They'll find another way in before they could move." The sound of boots echoed across the hangar floor. Figures emerged from the shadows, more hunters, at least a dozen weapons ready. Daniel swore under his breath. The leader stepped forward, the same tall figure from the docks. "You ran well, human." "But this is the end." Lyra stepped back, her eyes darting to the side hatch of the freighter. Daniel shook his head slightly. Telling her without words to stay put, the leader raised a hand. "Give her to us, and you can walk away." Daniel's voice was steady. "Not happening." The hunters began to spread out, moving to encircle the ship. Daniel glanced toward the overhead crane system. A plan formed quickly in his mind. "Hold on," he whispered to Lyra. He sprinted to the control console on the far wall, flipping switches and releasing the crane's heavy cargo clamps. With a loud metallic groan, a massive container swung down from above, smashing into the hangar floor between the hunters and the ship. The impact sent a shockwave through the bay. Scattering the attackers, Daniel fired his blaster, driving them back further. "Now?" he shouted, racing toward the cockpit. Lyra scrambled inside, sealing the hatch behind them. Daniel fired the engines, the roar filling the bay. The freighter lifted off, smashing through the hangar doors in a storm of sparks and torn metal. The leader of the hunters leaped aside, their cloak whipping in the blast. The open night sky spread before them. Daniel angled the ship toward deep space. Below, the city lights vanished, replaced by the endless black scattered with stars. Lyra sank into the co-pilot seat, still clutching the blanket Daniel had given her. She looked at him, her voice soft but certain. "You didn't have to do this." Daniel kept his eyes on the stars ahead. "Yes, I did." They both knew the hunters would be back. But for now, they had escaped, and for the first time. Lyra allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. The stars stretched endlessly around them. Daniel's freighter moved through the black like a small, stubborn spark of light. The hum of the engines was steady. But Daniel kept checking the radar. The hunters were gone from sight. Yet he knew it was only a matter of time before they found the trail again. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, her knees drawn close. She still held the blanket around her shoulders. Though the cabin was warm, her eyes moved between the stars. Outside in Daniel at the controls, for the first time. Her expression was not only fear. There was something else now, something uncertain but brighter. "How far will we go?" she asked quietly. "As far as we need to," Daniel replied. "And after that," she said, her voice hesitant. Daniel glanced at her. "After that, we figure it out." Silence filled the cabin for a while. Lyra rested her head lightly against the seat, her gaze fixed on the streaks of light as the ship jumped. To faster than light travel, she had not seen this view in years. The vastness of space had once felt like a cage, a reminder of her exile. But now, it felt different, because she wasn't alone in it anymore. When the ship dropped out of jump speed, hours later, a quiet moon hung before them. It was small. With pale silver oceans and a scattering of green countenance, Daniel pointed. "We'll land there, get supplies, maybe disappear for a while?" Lyra tilted her head. "Disappear?" He nodded. "Sometimes the best way to fight is to hide until you're ready." They touched down on a quiet stretch of coastline. The air outside was cool and clean, the wind carrying the scent of salt water. Daniel set up a small camp near the ship, starting a fire from driftwood. Lyra sat beside it, her hands stretched toward the warmth. She watched him work, her brow furrowed. "You've helped me more than anyone ever has," she said softly. Daniel shrugged. "You needed it." Her voice dropped. "You don't understand. In my world, no one would risk themselves for an exile." Daniel poked the fire with a stick, the flames crackling. "In my world," he said, "it doesn't matter where you come from. It matters what you do now." For a long moment, she stared at the fire. Then she said, "If I stay with you, they will never stop hunting." Daniel met her gaze. "Then we make them regret every time they try." Her lips curved into a faint smile. The first real smile he had seen from her. The next morning, Daniel began repairing parts of the ship that had been damaged during the chase. Lyra brought him tools, slowly learning what each one was called. She asked questions about the ship, about space travel, about the human worlds. Daniel answered patiently, and little by little, the space between them felt less like a gap, and more like a bond. Days passed on the quiet moon. At night, they would sit by the fire. Lyra began to tell him pieces of her story, how she had been cast out, how the clan elders had declared her unworthy. She spoke of the cold nights alone, of surviving on scraps. Daniel listened, never interrupting. When she finished, he said only, "You're worth more than they ever saw." One evening, as the firelight danced on the waves, Lyra turned to him. "Daniel, can I ask something?" "Sure," he said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shone. "Am I part of your clan now?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "You are my clan." Her breath caught, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry, but instead, she leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. The word clan had always been a chain around her neck, but now, with Daniel, it felt like something else entirely, a promise. A week later, the radar picked up movement. Daniel knew without looking that the hunters had found them again, but this time, it didn't feel like they were running without a plan. This time, they had something to fight for. Lyra stood beside him in the cockpit, her chin lifted. No longer the girl in rags at the market, no longer the trembling exile. Daniel glanced at her and saw not weakness, but strength that had been waiting for someone to believe in it. "They're here," he said. She nodded. Then we faced them together. The engines roared to life, the freighter lifting from the sand. The hunters' ships appeared on the horizon, dark shapes cutting across the silver sky. Daniel's hands tightened on the controls. Lyra's voice was calm, no matter what happens. "Thank you," Daniel smiled faintly. "We're not done yet." As the freighter surged upward into the stars, both of them knew the road ahead would be long and dangerous. But for the first time, it didn't matter, because they weren't just running anymore, they were moving forward together, and no matter how far they went, they would go as family.